Good evening, everyone. My name is Jose Villegas. I'm the acting executive director of the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights, the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. It is my pleasure to have you all here tonight in this program. This is titled "Voting, Democracy, and Action: The United States Constitution and You." With us are two long-term collaborators and brilliant legal minds here in Prince George's County, in the state of Maryland, Renée Battle-Brooks and Gabriel Christian. With me this evening as a co-host from the Office of Human Rights are Tiana Davis and Kyla Hannington. Those of you who have watched some of our program previously may recognize Renée and Gabriel. Renée served as executive director of the Office of Human Rights from 2018 through 2024, and Gabriel, we just learned that he was awarded the Judge James Award from Prince George's County Bar Association, has been our guest on several programs related to democracy and the rule of law. It is our honor to have both of these scholars and civil activists with us again tonight. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To get started tonight, Ms. Battle-Brooks, can you take a few minutes to tell the viewers a little bit about you and why this program is important to you?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me back. It's an honor to be here, and I look forward to our conversation over the next hour. The lens that I look through the Constitution in is several folds. One, I look through it through the Fourth Amendment and the First Amendment, Second Amendment, some of those, because I served as a public defender for the state of Maryland for 8 years, and that's, of course, where you protect the constitutional rights of those that are accused of crimes and are indigent, meaning they cannot afford to pay for a private attorney. And by protecting their rights, I was protecting your rights and my rights. And then I became a prosecutor for the 19 years following that. And again, I was looking through the Constitution and very particular amendments through that lens. Again, ensuring that rights were not trampled on when cases were investigated or folks were charged with or accused of crimes. But I also look at it as an American, but as an American who had the privilege of living in other countries and really viewing the wonderful things that we have here through that lens, and as compared to some of the other countries and cultures that I lived in. And so we're coming up on our 250th birthday, and I think that this conversation is really relevant. So thank you.
Thank you, Renée. Gabriel, we would like to hear from you if you can talk about a little bit about your background and the urgency of this topic at this time.
Thank you very much, Kyla and Ms. Davis. I just want to say it's a high honor and privilege for me to associate with the Prince George's County, Maryland Office on Human Rights. Your office really represent the sort of evolution of our society to a place beyond the strictures of prejudice and racial and class hierarchy, which oftentimes in the earlier days made a mockery of U.S. democracy. I went to school here in the city at the University of DC Business School, and then I went to Georgetown University Law Center. And I've been practicing law. This year will be my 35th year, but if I take my clerkship, it'll be 37 years. And when I came to Washington, D.C. from Dominica, so here I was, an African born in the Americas. So I'm an African-American, but I wasn't born in the United States. I was born on a small island in North America, right below Puerto Rico, called Dominica. And when I was born, Dominica was a British colony. And when my father served in the war during World War II, he did not have the right to vote. The right to vote came to the English islands after World War II. It's not unlike the African American story. You had African Americans in the Revolutionary War that brought the Constitution into being. They fought and died and sacrificed. Crispus Attucks, the first person to fall for American independence at the riot in Boston, was an African American. But when the revolution succeeded, people who were African Americans or Native Americans or white women or white men without property did not have the right to vote. And I will say from the outset, I think as an immigrant to the United States, it's a high honor and privilege for me to have participated in the civil rights movement as a student. And I can tell you that the right to vote is very precious, but you have to be a citizen of the United States to vote. And I will outline later on in this discussion how almost impossible it is for someone who is not a U.S. citizen to vote. Because first you have to register. And to register, you have to show that not only you were once a resident, but you've been a naturalized citizen. And if you are found to be involved in any sort of perpetrating of a falsehood, that is presenting yourself as a citizen when you're not, the rules are such and the penalties are such that only someone who's insane or foolish would even try it, because I believe it's under federal law, it's 5 years incarceration and of course deportation after, because if you commit a crime of that kind, it's a deportable offense. So people who are immigrants to the United States, they want to become residents and they want to become citizens. So they wouldn't want to go ahead and engage in any conduct that would undermine their opportunities in that regard. So that's who I am. I came as a student in the 1980s and had the high honor and privilege of attending college and law school and serving the people of the great state of Maryland and all across the country for many years. And I'm honored by the commission to have us here, my sister, dear friend, Renée Battle-Brooks, in this conversation on the Constitution and democracy. The democracy, which we will explain, has been evolving over time.
Thank you very much for sharing that your personal experience in just briefly as some of the experience, especially as an immigrant, for some of us in this conversation. And hopefully we will have a fruitful discussion about the U.S. Constitution in the actions in our daily life. But can we start with if somebody could give us an overview of the Constitution for some of the people that are listening that might not be aware of the extent people might hear what's the Constitution, but not necessarily know a little bit. Can you give us an overview?
Well, if I may, the U.S. Constitution is almost like in a computer, you've got the CPU, the central processing unit. So I use that terminology because really it governs our lives in entirety. It governs our lives in entirety. The United States Constitution begins with the profound words, quote, "We the people." And so those three words establish a foundational principle that the political power in the United States resides not in kings, not in some ruling oligarchy or elite, but that the power of governance derives from the citizens exercising the franchise, right? So the right to vote, which is what a franchise is, underpins everything. And so the United States really was constructed on the basis of a constitution that says that we have a representative republic, where citizens vote for their elected representatives, some to be congressmen, or in later years, congresswomen. In the initial years, only men could vote. And as James Madison explained in the Federalist Papers, the republic a constitutional republic only continues to survive where ordinary citizens exercise that civic responsibility, which is the right to vote. That means if we're constantly at 48 and 49% and we're not voting, we cannot be heard to complain. because we really have the levers of power in our hands, and oftentimes through indolence or through ignorance or a lack of understanding of the constitutional process and how it works, people think, I'm not going to go to vote today, not understanding that by failing to vote, they actually undermine the very principle of a constitutional democracy and the very republic within which we live. But the point I'm going to make is that when the Constitution was enacted back in 1787, when it was brought into being, it was brought into being in a society full of contradictions. So while it talked about we the people, really, they really referred to white males.
With property.
White males. White females were not involved. White males of property were the ones who were involved. White males who did not have property were eliminated or not allowed to vote. And certainly African Americans, Native Americans, from whom many of the Hispanic American community come, did not have those rights. So what we see is a document which over time evolved, and Sister Renée will speak to that. Jose, you talked about the Reconstruction era amendments. We'll address that. But Renée, you may want to add to what I've said about the foundational principle. And I'll just say quickly, it's Article 1, Section 4. It doesn't give a lot of detail, but basically says that, of course, federal elections, as in congressional, as in the presidential election, of course, there are rules that govern that, but the states are responsible in the United States to run elections, not the federal government. Although there's a movement now that seeks to change that for reasons that are very partisan, and that should not be allowed. So in Maryland, for instance, when you vote for your congressperson, your senator, or the president, all of that is organized by the local authority, the state authority. Thank you very much. I'll yield to our sister Renée.
Thank you. I do find it fascinating that the Constitution is very clear about the three co-equal branches, but I find it fascinating that I'm not sure a lot of people actually understand, if that makes sense, of a certain generation, perhaps I should say, because we apparently really aren't teaching civics anymore in school, in a lot of schools. And I'm just struck sometimes by, you'll see sort of things on YouTube or comedians who will stop, the man on the street, the woman on the street, and ask about some of these things. And they really don't have an understanding about our foundational, the way that we work, just as Gabriel said. I wonder how what's the best way to explain the three co-equal branches to people? The fact that provides our checks and balances. It means that one branch can't outrun the other, etc. But yes, each branch has different functions for sure, and different powers and authority that are to be respected. But there is this check and balance. I wonder sometimes how that, what I perceive to be sort of lack of understanding, plays to our average citizen. That's one. The other thing I wanted to comment on, I think if we had 50% voting, I would fall off of this chair. I don't even think it's that high. And I love what you said, Gabriel, about it is civic duty to vote. It's you don't vote because, oh, my vote doesn't count. You vote because it is your civic duty to vote. If you believe in this great country and the words, we the people, because as you said, the power of this country is vested in us through those that we appoint or elect, I should say, to then be the vote and the voice for what we the people.
I'm sorry. I just want to highlight that because I really appreciate you commenting on the responsibility. So I recently became a citizen, and so because it was very recent, I remember that the way that those two things, There's many things that are afforded residents of the country, but to become a citizen, the way it's put, when you become a citizen, or at least at the time that I became a citizen, it wasn't that you had a right to vote or a right to serve on a jury. That wasn't a right. That was a responsibility. And it was a responsibility of citizenship, and that was how it was delivered. And so I really recognize the frustration, and I hear from people, and I sometimes feel it myself, the frustration about it doesn't matter if I vote or blah, blah, blah. We can get in our heads about these things. And so I really appreciate the fact that you're emphasizing right now that voting is not actually a right, it's a responsibility. And I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, it is the responsibility of good citizenship. Why, you should not delegate that to somebody else and not participate because you're unhappy about something. You must vote. You must. That is yeah.
So let me ask the question related to the topic that you all discussing about that when you become a citizen, the responsibility of voting. Now, is it by design or what that, other countries, they have a national holiday on election day to allow people that might not be able to vote because they depend on the job. And here is not a national holiday. Is it by design, or what's your thought about that?
That's a very good, may I?
Yes, please.
That's a very good question, Jose. But before I answer it, and I'll try to answer it best I can, I want to go back to Kyla because she talked about becoming a citizen. What most U.S. citizens who are born citizens, that is, they did not have to go through naturalization, don't realize is you have to take an exam. You have to take an exam in U.S. history. You have to take an exam in the U.S. Constitution. And I think that most persons who become U.S. citizens are more learned and more knowledgeable about the U.S. Constitution and history than the average U.S. citizens who are born citizens. For instance, Renée talked about civics. She's absolutely correct. There's an appalling absence of civic education in all schools. So when Kyla talks about voting not being a right but a responsibility, serving on a jury panel being a responsibility, not simply a right. The fact is we may have a lot of rights that we do not exercise, but you should exercise almost as a function of your being part of society, as an obligation to society, that civic engagement to elect the best persons to rule over that society. Because when Jose, there is no national holiday, and I do believe in some countries where voting is mandatory, we may have to get to that. Because what happens is, if you allow the political arena to be dominated simply by those with money, who can pay politicians, who can fund campaigns, and the average citizen who has a right to vote believes that his vote or her vote does not count, you've undermined democracy, you've destroyed democracy, and you have not the best people being elected, but the worst.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And Jose, to your question, it's a good question. I don't know why we don't have it as a national holiday. Certainly, if you work in certain places, it's closed. For instance, if you work for government, it's closed so that you can go, or perhaps your facility is used as, I don't know, schools, etc. But it is such a good question. I don't know. And it seems that, if we say we believe in democracy, and to Gabriel's point, democracy encourages everyone to vote because that is foundational. That is foundational. So it's a very good question. I don't know why.
Well, go ahead, Gabriel.
I do believe I know why. In the early days when the Constitution was formed, Jose, only 10 to 15%, only 10 to 15% of the population voted. So it meant that you really did not have a democracy in the United States. What did you have? You had Native Americans who could not vote. huge population at that time vis-a-vis the general population. African Americans in some places were 45, in some places like Mississippi, 55% of the population. They could not vote. White women could not vote. White men without property could not vote. So the restriction of the franchise to only a tiny elite of 10 to 15% is really an early distortion and undermining of the democratic ethos that sort of framed the whole process of the Constitution, which in the preamble talks about all men being equal and, of course, the inalienable rights being bestowed upon us by our Creator. But historically, I believe that limitation has remained within the body politic and continues even to this day, even though the franchise is much more expansive than it was back in 1787. So I think there is almost kind of like a inbred belief by so many in our society, even though it's not the case that my vote doesn't count. No, that's not true. Your vote does count. And I do look for a day when we can have a national holiday to encourage voting, better civic education, and making of the vote a mandatory exercise, just like serving the jury panel. You can't just not show up for jury service, by the way. If you don't, Renée, can you tell us what happens?
Yes, well, if you ignore it, the judge whose job it is to be the jury judge will, depending on the situation, could, I suppose, send out the sheriffs immediately to arrest you, to bring you in to what is called a show cause, to show cause why you shouldn't be held in contempt and perhaps go to jail for ignoring a court order. The nicer way is that the judge who is in charge of the jury for that period of time, the rotation, will send out a notice to you saying you must appear in court and explain yourself. And so I'm sure you've seen this, Gabriel, walking down the court halls and you see a line of people and you hear mumbling. It's like, oh, you failed to come. It's like, you got sent to the principal's office. This is what's happening. They're like, yes. So you have such a great point. It is a duty. It's a duty as a citizen of this country to participate in the process through the jury process. That's one duty. We all have to participate.
I just have to say that I moved to this country in 2015, and I in July, and I got called for jury duty in August, which I couldn't do because I wasn't a citizen. And then I got called for jury duty in 2017, and I wasn't a citizen. 2019 wasn't a citizen. 2021 was not a citizen. 2023 was a citizen, but they didn't call me. So 2025, when they called me again, I'm very popular with the jury pool. I actually got to go, and it was the greatest day of my life. So I didn't go to a courtroom, but it really was like for someone, when you haven't been able to do it. And I think this is going back to the vote. When you haven't been able to do it and you have the opportunity to do it, you feel the privilege of being able to do it.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the Constitution and really bring it to where we are now. We've got people watching us, so thank you so much, people tuning in. And I feel so lucky for you that you got to hear from Renée and Gabriel. And I know lots of smart people, but I don't know anybody as smart as Gabriel Christian. So I'm so glad that we all get to be here today.
Well, all I know came from Renée Battle-Brooks. Just want to let you know.
That's not true.
She played the violin. I can't play the violin.
Why should the Constitution, like here we are, it's 2026. Why should this Constitution, why does it matter to residents today, right here?
Wow. Okay. Just to piggyback on what Gabriel said, it is foundational to who we are, who we say we are. And Gabriel did point out some of the paradoxes with the language because of the historical times and the language used, we the people, and all of these lofty, right? this document is such a beautiful guideline to, or guidance to, how and what we should do, how we should act, how process works. Is it perfect? Well, are humans perfect? So no, we are not perfect. The document really sets guidance on how we should comport ourselves, how our government should operate. Is there room for improvement? Always. So why is this important? It's important because I know we all like to sort of talk about the Constitution, even if we don't really understand it. And we do wrap ourselves in the flag and the Constitution all at the same time, right? It's part of our identity. But it is interesting because I don't think we all understand our complete identity. But it is important because you have to have something to believe in. You have to have something to base what we as a collective people, as society, say, the things that are important for us. And so this document that was adopted in 1787, we have not changed it, right? The articles are there. We have made amendments, but it's important because this should be the rules that we live by. If we say we are Americans from the United States of America, this is the Holy Grail. This is what should guide us. Gabriel.
Thank you so much. Renee, what you said was so brilliant. So, folks who don't know, I'll tell you what the real deal is. The United States Constitution, in many respects, is the mother of all constitutions, in that many of the constitutions in the world today draw a lot of the principles from the founding document that brought this republic into being. And I believe that the U.S. Constitution is much more powerful than we give it credit for. It's much more powerful than a missile or a drone or a nuclear bomb. It has been looked at by many nations as a tool to not only abide by, but to integrate into their founding national ethos and governing document. As Renee said, the Constitution was enacted in 1787. And as I said, it's like the CPU. It's the governing framework. And earlier on, I'm not sure it was Renee or it was Kyla or it was Jose who talked about the separation of powers. That's the legislative branch really is we the people. These are the representatives. We don't elect them through an electoral college like the president. They are elected directly. So there are how many of us here? 5 of us. Renee gets 100 votes. Tiana gets 200. Jose gets 300. I get 400. Kyla wins by a landslide because she gets 650. She's directly elected by the people.
Right.
The legislative branch is the branch that has the power to declare war. Why? Because they represent the people in all the states, all the localities. That legislative branch has the power to declare that which should be taxed and that which should not be taxed. And the reason that the framers in their wisdom decided to give that to the legislative branch, not to the executive, is because they figured if you had one person, one man, in those days, no women, right? We still haven't had a woman after all these years. Can you imagine how sad that is? It's my opinion anyway. Some people will not consider it sad. The reason they did not want to give to one person was that one person could become authoritarian. They could declare war without any sort of balancing of the equities or the different concerns that the citizenry might have. They could act in a way that was what you call unilateral, without any regard to the courts or the legislative branch. Taxation, well, they could decide to tax their enemies and not their friends. They could decide to give tax waivers to companies that supported their campaign and paid donors pay donations or as major donors into their campaign. And that's happening in a sense where major corporate entities support politicians in the legislative branch right now. But the citizen has a greater power and influence on the legislators in the legislature. So you've got the legislative branch, and that branch is the branch that decides on the law. The judicial branch, the court system, interprets the laws passed by the legislative branch. The framers decided to not give the authority of interpretation to the people who framed the laws. Because if they gave them the power to interpret, well, they could just interpret it in their favor. And so you have another branch that's co-equal, and that's the judiciary, as in our Supreme Court on the federal level, and as in our Supreme Court on the state level. And finally, you have the executive branch. The executive branch is there to execute the laws, not to break the laws. And if, for instance, the executive branch is challenged, for instance, on a tariff, where the challenge is, well, you impose the tax and you don't have the tax power. And they go to the Supreme Court to decide who's right and who's wrong. And the executive branch loses, then the thing to do is to be polite and to be judicious and measured in your speech, and not to berate and condemn and to curse the court, because that's disrespectful to a co-equal branch. You've got to show due deference. I mean, Sister Renée Battle-Brooks tried many a case. I'm sure because she's a brilliant attorney, she won most of the cases. But I'm sure there are other occasions where she did not. And when she did not win, I'm sure it was her tradition to go across to the prosecutor and shake hands and say, you know what, good job. I'll see you again next time. It's that kind of respect for the Constitution and rule of law that makes for democracy to continue, where we respect the role of the legislative branch, the role of the judiciary, and the role of the executive, all of them working together and balancing out against each other their respective rights and responsibilities.
Now, let me ask, and I'll give the turn to Tiana after. There's two schools of thoughts going on with the United States Constitution, right? The first one is more of the document, the U.S. Constitution is a living document. And another school of thought is that you have to read it based on the text of the document. What's your thought about that?
So I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I have heard both of these discussions. I believe that it is a living document, and I think it has proven itself to be a living document. If it wasn't, I certainly would not be allowed to vote today. So it has to be a living document because the words are there, and the meanings and how we, the people, decide that we want our society to be fits in with what these words mean. So if you're a strict constitutionalist or a strict interpretation, I've heard some great arguments, pro and con, but some really, I have to think about where I heard it, but really joint analysis on what that means and how actually it's very circular and it doesn't make sense, but that's just my opinion. Gabriel?
Well, I endorse every single thing that our brilliant, she says she's not a scholar, I beg to defer.
I think I'm being set up.
So the strict, Brother Jose, the strict constructionist view, certain Supreme Court justices are known to have that view to the degree that there are some people who I speak to who say that if a law was passed reintroducing chattel slavery, they would find some way to justify it. Okay? So a strict constitutionalist view is that it's a legal philosophy that essentially says that the document is to be narrowly interpreted. Basically, limiting federal power only to that which is explicitly written. It focuses on the literal, original meaning of the text at the time of the adoption and opposes broad or implied powers, or what they usually try to call judicial activism. But it basically is a view that makes little sense. Little sense in particular because we know that the United States is a country which has changed enormously since the Constitution was enacted in 1787. We're in a time of artificial intelligence. We went through a terrible civil war where Abraham Lincoln at the Gettysburg Address, in his concluding remarks, said, "We here resolved that we shall have government of the people, by the people, for the people, and that shall never perish from the earth." So if we were to take the view that the Constitution should be strictly interpreted, well, the Constitution says somewhere in its body that African Americans are 3/5 of a man. And why did that come about, Jose? What the at the founding, the Southerners who were slaveholders primarily wanted to have their, they were caught in this duality. They did not respect the humanity of African Americans, but they wanted to count them as a whole person. And the Northerners, who were not slave-owning states, said, no, if you think they're property, property doesn't vote. And it was the amount of persons who were people that would give the amount of, it's a census rather that would give the apportionment of seats in the Congress and that type of thing. So if you allowed the folks in the South to count as slaves or their enslaved Africans as whole people, as whole persons, it would weigh the representation in the legislative branch in the Congress towards the South. So the compromise they came up with was to consider African Americans 3/5 of a person. And so that's where you have the 3/5 clause. And so I tend to Renée's view, not tend to Renée's view simply because I think she's a brilliant person, but because it's the truth. We have evolved from that. And had we not evolved from that, there would be no democracy in the United States, because I take the view that it's only in recent times that the United States Constitution has really taken root and that we have any semblance of democracy. Were we a democracy in 1787? We were not. Were we a democracy in 1791? We were not. We were a democracy for some people. If those persons were white and had property, then they could vote and they could do that which they thought best. But the vast majority of Americans had no say. And so you cannot be in a society and call it a democracy where the overwhelming majority of the people who live in that society have no say in how that society is governed.
My question is sort of a follow-up to Kyla's, where she was asking how or why the Constitution matters. And I guess I sort of wonder, why or how is the Constitution even relevant in 2026? For instance, the right to bear arms, right? When that was ratified, they had muskets and you needed gunpowder, and it took a while to reload your gun after, a single shot. Whereas in 2026, people can let off 20 rounds in a few seconds. And, there are other things like that. Just were the rules that were set in the 1700s, 1800s, even the 1970s, right? Was that when the last amendment was signed? How are those things relevant to us in 2026, especially now where it's like, well, some people are just disregarding what the Supreme Court says. It's just the Wild West here, right?
So I'll just jump in. So when you're talking about the Second Amendment, so that's the Bill of Rights, and those were ratified in 1791. So a few years after the actual, the Constitution. But again, we were building our foundations. But in answer to your question, I'll just talk a little bit about the Fourth Amendment and its relevancy. And if you would just allow me to nerd out for a moment on the book. And in my current position, I waive this book when I'm teaching. I teach, well, we'll get to that at the end. But the Fourth Amendment is like the Bible when it comes to criminal prosecution, criminal defense. Gabriel can tell you. The Fourth Amendment is, again, 1791. And I'm going to read it to you. And you're going to see these words are words that you still hear today. And it is still fundamental to searches and seizures, right? So the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So the relevancy, this a law enforcement officer cannot just stop you, pull you over, or engage without probable cause. Well, there's a lesser standard, reasonable articulable suspicion, but they certainly can approach you, but that has to be consent, right? You're free to walk away and say, I don't want to talk to you. And there's nothing that can be done unless they have something called reasonable articulable suspicion for a Terry stop. We don't have time to delve into what all that means. Or the highest standard is probable cause, which came from 1791. It is so relevant because that means, Tiana, that wherever you live in the DMV, that particular local law enforcement officer cannot just come to Tiana Davis's door and knock it down because they want to, because they're the government. They can't do it because the Fourth Amendment says they have to go to a neutral magistrate. They have to go to a neutral body, a judge, to present what they believe is probable cause to this person that has nothing to do with the case, to see if they agree. And if they agree, then they give you the warrant. You have to swear it under oath. All of these things that they said in 1791 are not just still relevant, they are fundamental to your freedom to have the government not come and do what they want just because they're the government. So that's just one example. I hear what you're saying about the Second Amendment. I mean, there's certainly lots of discussion about what that means and, you know, the times. And so to Gabriel's point, when we were talking about sort of the strict, constructionists, and yes, there wasn't a standing army like there is now. What do those words mean? And so when I say people tie themselves up in knots when they take that position, and again, that's just my opinion, it logically doesn't make sense. So the First Amendment, the right, the freedom to assemble on the street as a person who has a grievance against the government. You're allowed to do that peacefully. The right to practice your religion or not as you want to. That's all part of it. The right to freely speak. Of course, there are constraints on freedom of speech, right? You can't yell a bomb at the airport and see what happens if you do, right? You can't, you can't yell fire in a theater because of, like there's certain things, but the freedom of expression. So yeah, you see, you have me nerding out. It is so relevant. This is who we are. This is what guides us. This is what protects us. These are the guarantees that we have that not all countries have. And we have to guard them and we have to safeguard them.
I'm sorry, may I?
Yes, go no.
So
go
let's look at it this way, Tiana. The Constitution basically places a restraint on government, right? And you have to look at the context. So the United States made a revolution because Britain was the colonial power, and the redcoats would go into people's homes. And they just go in and they would say, I'm sleeping here tonight. And they'd kick you out your bed. And they'd have 10 or 12 soldiers in your home. And so when the Constitution was framed, it was framed based on that knowledge of how imposing and burdensome and oppressive the occupying redcoats were. So the framers then wanted to ensure that the oppressive conduct of state agents under King George were not allowed to find root in the new constitutional framework that would guide the new republic. And so government power was limited. You can't just go into someone's home, as the former public defender told us so eloquently. You have to have a warrant sworn out by a judicial officer, and you have to do that only upon showing of probable cause that you believe a crime has been committed, or in that particular location, you may find contraband or some illegal substance or material, and that has to be then provided to the law enforcement officer, signed by a judge, giving them the right to go into your home. It also held government officers accountable. In the period where King George presided, a lot of the British officials held themselves above the law, although Britain was the originator of the Magna Carta, which basically said or held to the principle that no one is above the law. But they would disregard the Magna Carta. And the essence of the Magna Carta, M-A-G-N-A, Magna Carta, C-A-R-T-A, is that everyone is equal before the law. Today, we have an erosion of that principle. I believe our Supreme Court has erred mightily by giving a certain waiver to the presidency, a certain license. The law should apply to the president in the White House, the ordinary citizen in his home, the corporate executive in his office. It should all apply to us equally, because when you begin to create different categories of citizens, where you say that one category, because of their power in society, because of their moneyed interest, are not obligated to respect the rights of others, are not obligated to respect the rights of ordinary citizens, you have done great damage, great injury to the very ethos of a constitutional democracy. So, Tiana, the Constitution has relevance. Your point is valid, though, in that at the time when the Constitution was framed, there was no standing army. What you had was a militia, the Minutemen. That means they would come out in a minute with their muskets. We are saying that they're in a society with nuclear weapons and AI, and you can pick up the phone and make a call, and you've got the National Guard, and then you have this Federal Army, and you have the Navy, and you have the Air Force, and you have the Army, and you have the Marine Corps. They have been charged by the legislative branch with the defense on federal level, the National Guard defense on the state level. So the right to bear arms, as originally conceived, has lost its purpose. And so you see now the people who are bearing arms are not bearing arms to defeat tyranny or to defeat a foreign power, as the Minutemen did. They are applying their perverse practices oftentimes in malls, schools, and massacring their fellow citizens because they are clothed with enormous power of machineries, as you correctly said, of death, that are not muzzle-loading muskets that can shoot one ball maybe 100 yards and takes 5 minutes to load and to fire. So with time, we can see the evolution. There are people who say we still need it because we need it in case another tyrant shows up. We'll see. But we can see that the Constitution we have is a document that has evolved over time.
Okay, let me, if I can jump in. I'm sure Kyla and I are already thinking about part 7 of this series because of all this great conversation that's taking place. I do want to transition a little bit the conversation because we're running out of time. I don't know how time is going so fast. About the Reconstruction Amendment, I think I wanted to point those, have a brief discussion on that, especially how having those Reconstruction Amendment apply to now. dealing with citizenship, dealing to what led to possible the death of a president. Gabriel, can you talk about that?
Very important. Jose, Tiana, Kyla, our sister, Renee. The United States had a second revolution. So when they talk about the 250th anniversary of the United States this year, I take the view that the United States, that is a democracy, that there is the republic that is worthy of respect of the utmost level, is the republic that was born after the Civil War that ended in 1865. Not to say that the United States from 1776 had no value. I have outlined, I believe, with precision, the value of a constitution, 1787, the value of a Bill of Rights, 1791, that established freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, the right to due process, and on and on. Those things were valuable. But was it a democracy? I believe the evidence would overwhelmingly show it was not. So in 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed into as an executive order during the war as a wartime necessity by President Abraham Lincoln, stating that all enslaved African Americans, because the Civil War erupted over the election of Lincoln, and the South seceded and started the Confederacy to perpetuate slavery. And Abraham Lincoln initially did not want to pass an Emancipation Proclamation because he was afraid that the border states, like Missouri, like Maryland, would join the Confederacy. And so he was very tactful in not moving too quickly. D.C., where he was in the White House, was right between two slave states. People don't remember that. Virginia was the capital of the Confederacy. Maryland was not a free state. They called it a free state, but it was a slave state. So he wanted to make sure he could gather enough federal troops onto his side to protect the District of Columbia, where he was presiding, before passing the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. And because it was not a constitutional amendment, his fear was, and I ask all our listening audience to look at Steven Spielberg's wonderful movie with Daniel Day-Lewis as Abraham Lincoln, brilliant movie. He said we need a constitutional amendment because when the war ends, they could try to re-enslave African Americans. They could say that the opponents of freedom could say that the wartime emergency is ended, so that we do not need to enforce that proclamation. So we need an amendment, and that's where the 13th Amendment came from, that abolished slavery. And then the 14th Amendment that says all persons born within the United States are citizens, birthright citizenship. Because remember, one of the cases that preceded the Civil War, that many historians will say was sort of the trigger mechanism, was the Dred Scott decision presided over by Chief Justice Taney of Maryland, by the way, a slave owner, who said, and I quote, that the black man or woman or person has no rights that a white person is bound to respect. Essentially, the black person in America or the African descended person in America, like the Native American, had no rights. They were not citizens. So the 14th Amendment basically made it such, and it was designed to ensure that the formerly enslaved African Americans were given citizenship, but it applied to all those born in the United States. And that today applies to everyone without regard to color. So if you're Hispanic descent, you're Asian descent, African American descent, if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen. That's the 14th Amendment. And the 15th Amendment, Jose, prohibited denying the vote based on race. Because what was happening was, although black people or African Americans had become citizens, they would be regularly excluded from voting, especially in the South. Even after the 15th Amendment was passed, it was not until the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65 under Lyndon Baines Johnson, who succeeded the assassinated John F. Kennedy, that we really saw the implementation across the country of the 15th Amendment. So you're very correct. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments really did a great deal to make the United States the democracy that we seek to protect today.
We've got some comments in the chat about this. Someone's just said, that we even have amendments is proof that it is a document made for growth. And we actually have a question that actually mirrors a question that we have ourselves to ask. So this is from one of our frequent, wonderful viewers, Dr. White, who says, "Oh no, I just looked at the time." Is how I feel. How can this conversation continue? We've already heard Jose say that we're going to have at least 7 more episodes, but she's wondering, are there any contemporary resources that detail the Constitution that you can recommend to people who are watching now?
So, Renée, do you mind?
Please.
So I want to show this book. It's A Man on Fire, okay? It's the words of Thomas Wentworth Higginson. I never heard of Higginson until about 2 or 3 years ago. He was one of the leading abolitionists who really made our Constitution what it is today. Another great abolitionist was Jeffrey Boutwell, radical Republican and champion of democracy. Both Boutwell and Higginson were great supporters of Abraham Lincoln. And so we, as Renée said, we don't teach enough civics. But I believe that a great place to start, just from being someone who knows the audiovisual media, like movies, do make a big difference, is Lincoln by Steven Spielberg. It talks about Lincoln's effort to abolish slavery. And of course, people like Higginson and people like Boutwell. And don't forget John Brown of Harper's Ferry. Many people now deny him a place. But the Battle Hymn of the Republic is John Brown's song. And he was the white American abolitionist who went to Harper's Ferry to free enslaved African Americans. He did not succeed. He was captured and hung. And he made that prophecy on the gallows. And I quote, "Had I intervened in the affairs of the rich and powerful, I would have been called a hero. But because I've intervened in the affairs on behalf of the least of God's children," he was talking about African Americans, "I'm called a traitor. But I, John Brown, here prophesies that the sins of this guilty land shall not be purged, but with blood." And civil war started 18 months later. His prophecy was correct. Because a society that is not true to its founding document, a society that is rooted in hypocrisy, a society that is that gives weight to racial prejudice or class prejudice or oligarchy, is a society that undermines the principle of the founding fathers. The founding fathers were white men. They were not perfect, but they, I believe, did an enormous good to humanity by putting forth a document, as Renée says, that had within its body the seeds of liberty that since that period in 1787 bore the fruit of liberty that we can now consume. Because had they done a document that was hidebound and ossified and incapable of evolution, we wouldn't be here talking today. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 3 of us would be slaves. Jose would not be in the United States. Maybe Kyla would have a chance. Thank you very much.
1 out of 5. Okay.
1 out of 5.
There are also some online resources.
Yeah.
I know, Jose, during COVID, I forgot the name of the place that you pointed me to. I don't think it was the National Constitution Center, but there are online resources that are nonpartisan and really are dedicated to just teaching us about the Constitution. I don't know if you remember the name of it, Jose.
No, I don't.
If I can just say, to whoever asked that question, no American citizenry in history has had more access to resources than this current generation. It's called the smartphone.
Yeah, they're definitely, places that can break down all of, what it means and give historical context. For those who know me, and this will be the last thing I say. Well, I wanted to say one other thing, but understanding history is critical to understanding who we are. And we have to understand that in the context of the Constitution as well, and why we do what we do and why we don't. And so I implore all of us to be a little more curious about history. It's not boring. It informs who we are today, and it predicts who we will be tomorrow. If we don't understand where we came from, it's going to be not good.
Thank you. We are really at time, but I did hear you say, Renée, that there was one more thing that you'd like to say, and so I want to give you the opportunity to do that before we close out.
It's a total non sequitur, and
Okay.
I'm sorry. And I forgot to mention this when Jose asked, tell me a little bit. My current role is at Metro Transit Police, and part of what I do is train new recruits, and recruiting is why I wanted to mention, if anybody out there wants to join a great organization, Metro Transit Police. This is the only police department in the United States that has 3 concurrent jurisdictions, Maryland, DC, Virginia. There are no age limits. We are looking, as is every police department, but we are looking to hire people that are interested in serving. We move about 1 million people a day, and so it's a non-traditional type of policing because it doesn't have the strict boundaries it's moving. But the only requirements are that you're a U.S. citizen, that you're at least 20 years and 6 months of age, that you have a valid driver's license, high school diploma or GED equivalent. So no college is required. And the salary and benefits are really good. And so if you have interest, you can reach out to Kyla or directly to the WMATA, Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, and check out where you can apply. We welcome you. I can give Kyla the information, actually.
All right, thank you very much. So so you heard from Renée. Thank you. So our email, if you need to, I'll put it in. I'm going to put it in the chat. If someone, you say inviting people to reach out to me, but they need to know how to do that. So I'm going to put it in the chat just for a moment, my email. But I do want to be respectful of time. I also really want to say from my heart that for me, this is so fascinating, and I really meant what I said earlier, the privilege of being around people with such brilliance and knowledge and expertise, the fact that you're volunteering your time to be here tonight with us, and the fact that the public get to just have this for free is awesome. And thank you so much. It was a fantastic conversation. We would like it to continue, so you'll be hearing from our office. We would love to. I feel like this was just a tiny touch, and we saw that in the comments too, where people were commenting how much they love the conversation, but it wasn't like they need more and they want more. They want to hear more about the amendments. They want to hear more about this moment in time. So we will really work to do this. So I really want to thank you both for this. And Gabriel, this was you came to us with this brilliant idea, and so I want to acknowledge that and give you the shout out and the thanks for bringing this conversation to the public tonight. Renée, thank you for joining us and for all that you have done for our office and for the county. It's just been awesome. We really look forward to having you back. And for those watching, whether you're watching live or you're going to join us on demand, or you are joining us on demand later, thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. We hope to see you at some of our other events. You can learn more about all that we are doing by visiting our webpage at civilrights.mypgs.us. You'll learn all about the Office of Human Rights there. And we encourage you in this time, which is so heavy and over which we feel so little control. We encourage you to keep on doing what you are doing in your own lives to care for each other and for the world, to continue to participate in conversations such as this one, to participate in civic and civil discourse. Your thoughts and your actions matter. Thank you for all that you do. And Gabriel, please.
I just couldn't thank you so much. First of all, Kyla and Jose and Tiana, Sister Renée Battle-Brooks. I just want to leave our audience with 2 statements by 2 of our early leaders, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams. Oftentimes, the founding fathers get criticized because many of them were slave owners, but they knew that slavery was wrong. And in their diaries and in their private writings, you see that sort of what you call this Germans call it Sturm und Drang, that sort of tug and pull between that which they were speaking of in with liberty and the reality of chattel slavery. Thomas Jefferson said, and I quote, in an 1809 letter to Judge Spencer Rowan, he wrote, quote, "The spirit of resistance to government is so valuable on certain occasions that I wish it to be always kept alive. The spirit of the times may alter, will alter. Our rulers will become corrupt, our people may become careless. However, the people are the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty." This is what he's saying in 1809. The people are the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty. John Adams, 1798, said as follows, and I quote, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." Now, we may not be religious, all of us, but certainly we must all strive to be moral. He's saying that a constitution essentially is a, Jose, Kyla, Tiana, Renée, a piece of paper. It is those of us, we the people, who give it life. By breathing into it our engagement, our activism, our consciousness, our morality, or who consign it to death by our refusal to comport ourselves in synchronicity with the essence of liberty that was rooted in that document from the beginning.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate it. You will be here. You will be hearing from us. And so again, viewers, keep waiting, because we will be coming back to you soon with more of this. Again, thank you, Renée and Gabriel. It's been an incredible pleasure. Jose, Tiana, thank you. It's been a great night. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.